Hello, welcome back to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, with another preview, and today we're going to preview Aston Villa's season. It's the one that probably only me and Martin wanted to do and that nobody else will watch, but me and Martin fancied doing a Villa preview, so here we are. And to be fair, since he's left, everyone's been clamouring for this guy to come back to the podcast, but we couldn't get Josh, so we got Martin in to help us out instead for this Villa preview. Martin, how are you?
I'm good. I was intrigued about the intro. I didn't know what you were going to refer to me as, but yeah, standard dig from the off. We're in.
The tackle success guy. That's what I know you as. The tackle success guy.
That's it.
Yes. I mean, this time last year, no Aston Villa preview on Who Scored, because let's face it, Villa were not an exciting team to talk about. Unai Emery's turned them into a top 7 side, and we've managed to force this preview through. I think this is probably the most excited Villa fans have been for a season for a long, long time. Martin, would you agree?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, you can't take too much from pre-season, but from what's being tried out during the summer series and stuff like that, it was so fun to watch. Like, it wasn't perfect, and we obviously leaked a lot of goals, conceded 6 goals. But yeah, we're just playing a completely different way. And obviously, Unai Emery deserves a huge amount of credit. But one thing I think that's not lost, but I think maybe the players aren't getting the credit that they deserve, because this has been such a radical shift in style. And there were teething problems like there would always be. But the speed with which they've adapted to his ways of thinking, I think has been pretty remarkable, like across the board. And certainly the defence in particular, I guess, in terms of the playing out from the back. Obviously, they've addressed that area and signed Pau Torres, which we'll come on to. But Konsa and Mings were superb last season. I still think both will have a massive part to play this season. But yeah, it's been so fun to watch. I think we're playing more incisive passes within sort of one phase of play than we played in whole games under the likes of sort of Bruce and Gerrard at times as well. So yeah, things are definitely looking up.
I mean, the player that stands out to me the most is John McGinn. Mm-hmm. He was getting a little bit lost in Gerrard's system, wasn't allowed to do any of the things that he was good at. And Emery came in, kept him as captain, put him in the team. And I'd argue now he's probably the first name on the team sheet. I don't know if you watched the Brentford game in the summer series, but I thought that first 45 minutes, he was absolutely incredible. And that just shows you what Unai Emery's managed to do. He hasn't really, last season, he hadn't really brought in any of his own players except for Moreno at left back. But the improvement in the players that were already there, and McGinn was suffering at Villa. He was really, really struggling. Looks completely re-energised, revitalised, longest-serving player. But he looks like a much better player than the player that first joined, and he was good then.
Yeah. He just looks so tactically astute now. And I think that's the big difference. With McGinn, when he signed, everybody loved him straight away, and did for the most part until he obviously had the rocky patch start of last season, first half of last season, maybe the tail end of the season before that. He was always seen as just this sort of bull, this big ball of energy that bundled around, and maybe it was a strength but also a weakness at times. But he's just, like, tactically, he's become so more aware, and he's putting that energy to such better use now and popping up in all these sort of holes and positions. And like you said, against Brentford, he was outstanding. Like, his understanding of that role that he was asked to play was superb. And obviously he's an incredibly versatile player as well. And I think, like you say, that will definitely play in his favour in terms of being a certain starter. I think certainly at the start of the season, obviously he's the captain, so you would expect him to be. But I would say there's probably only a handful of players that fall into that category. The depth of the squad has improved that much, and there's competition almost everywhere. Not quite, but almost.
Yeah, the squad's nicely set. I think if the window shut tomorrow, I'll be relatively happy with how Villa line up and the business that they've done. If you were to suddenly sign 6-7 players, you're taking away the stuff that actually made you good in the first place. I think Villa are building in the right way. The 3 that they've brought in so far are classy additions. I think they're in a fortunate position where I don't think they have to rush Torres. I don't think they have to put Tielemans straight in. I think Tielemans has got a job getting into that central midfield with Kamara and Luiz, because they've been operating to a really high level under Unai Emery. Diaby's the exciting one because he does completely change that Villa attack, doesn't he? He looks an upgrade on the attacking players that are there already. And again, in that Brentford game, he just looks electric, didn't he?
Yeah. And the thing is, sort of, I've seen a fair bit of Moussa Diaby, but not enough of him in those central positions. And he did play there a fair bit last season. I think that's the big difference between him and obviously Bailey, where they are comparable, not necessarily comparable players, but comparable situations. They arrive at the team, come to Villa with a sort of comparable reputation at their time. Very similar statistics, both 9 goals and 8 assists in the league in their final season at Leverkusen. Both can play either flank, but Bailey was only ever really a winger. I think he'd only played 2 or 3 games from a central position at Leverkusen before Villa signed him. And obviously Villa signed him as a winger. And it's become clear that he doesn't really look like being that in Emery's system. It doesn't really look like he fits in that sort of 4 or whatever you want to call that midfield sort of square box, whatever. He's been sort of pushed forward into that support striker role for Ollie Watkins and struggled, I think, in general in that position. I don't think he's got that tactical awareness of that role yet. But Diaby had sort of developed that a bit last season. He played, I think it was 12 of his 40 games across the league in Europe came from central positions for Leverkusen last season. So he's got that that understanding of that position where Bailey's just been forced into it, really. Obviously played there a fair bit last season. He only got 2 goals from 13 starts as a sort of centre forward, as it were. Whereas Diaby got 5 goals and 3 assists from central positions last season. So there was already that sort of knowledge there that he could play that role. And I think obviously it's early days and he's only had a sub appearance and a start, but it looks very much like the case that he will be that support striker. And while he could be used on either flank, he's definitely been signed for that role with that role in mind. And that's what makes him that sort of upgrade on Bailey, I think. And I have some sympathy for Bailey because, like I said, he wasn't signed by Emery. He certainly wasn't signed for this system, and he was signed into a bit of a mess post Grealish era where Villa had no identity whatsoever, and it was that sort of hodgepodge of we've signed 3 players to come up to create Jack Grealish's output.
Remember how proud Christian Perzo looked in that video?
It was just nonsense. A lot of it was rushed. Obviously, Ings came as a complete surprise, and it's just opportunistic at the time. Whereas the signings we're making now are very, very well thought through, I think. And that hasn't really been the case, even up until sort of obviously last year with Coutinho. Dean obviously been expensive, and maybe Dean's a bit harsh, but obviously he won't be the first choice left back when Alex Moreno's fit. So on the money that he's on, you'd have to see that as a bit of a failure. But the signings we're making now are clearly well thought through, and you'd expect nothing less. Obviously with Monchi coming in, the reputation that he has. You're right. I think if we started the season now, I wouldn't be too disappointed. I think if opportunities arise in certain positions, then might do a bit more business, but certainly not for the sake of it, like some of the signings seem to have been in the past.
I still think you might see 1 or 2 more towards the end of the window. Another attacking player wouldn't surprise me, and still, even after what Emery said the other day, another goalkeeper as a backup wouldn't surprise me either. I think the thing with the signings that Villa have made as well, and this is actually vital going into Villa's campaign because they're going to be playing in Europe for the first time in a long time. All 3 of the players they've brought in, they're all used to playing midweek European football. Tillemans, Diaby and Pau Torres are quite well versed in Thursday, Sunday as well, I believe. So that will help Villa because it is a side that hasn't really got many players that have played in Europe other than really Emi Martinez that I can think of. Luca Dean, the PSG, I'm assuming, played in Europe. But do you know what I mean? There's not a lot of European experience within that squad.
Definitely, and we need to share out the minutes. And I think you're right to highlight those sort of attacking positions in particular. Been a lot of pressure on Ollie Watkins over the last 4 years. Obviously, Cameron Archer and probably John Duran look like they're going to stay this season and not go out on loan. Certainly, Archer, I'd expect to stay and compete or push Watkins. I don't think he'll come close initially. Yeah, taking some of that pressure off Watkins. I think since his last season at Brentford, including his last season at Brentford, he's missed 5 league games in 4 seasons.
Very durable.
So he's played a hell of a lot of football. And he will need to be managed because he's a pivotal player for Villa. I know he sort of maybe not divides opinion, but he comes under criticism quite often in spells, in fits and starts, which I think is really harsh. Could he be a better finisher at times? Yes, but so could 95% of strikers, and Villa aren't going to get that top 5%. So
Haaland misses chances. I've seen Haaland miss easy chances this season.
Yeah,
yes, he scored 100 goals, but he still misses chances.
Exactly. And what Watkins does for the team, and again, his understanding of the role that Emery wants him to play and the way that he's dovetailed with Diaby. Obviously, we've seen very little of it, but the early signs are really encouraging where they're both capable of dropping into pockets and linking up with with the likes of McGinn and players like on rushing down the flanks. It's looking really, really positive. But yeah, rotating the squad with Europe in mind is going to be crucial. And I think if there's another area, obviously you'd think we're probably it is probably right back. Obviously we've got players, centre backs that can play right back, and that could suit the way that Emery wants to play. Obviously that's going to be one of the sort of most interesting tactical.
I think you'll see a lot of that.
Yeah,
really, especially in Europe, I think you'll see a lot of that.
Yeah. So obviously you got Concert, even Chambers in sort of domestic cup competitions can do it. So they've got the backup there. But if Matty Cash gets injured, and that's perfectly possible, he's been injured a fair bit in certainly last season. And if potentially you've got Moreno out as well, then you don't have any fullbacks who are capable of bombing on, and that's pivotal for Emery on one side or the other, basically. Obviously, we saw Cash do it against Brentford, and it was interesting to see that Torres picked up the role on the left, where I think a lot of people might have expected that to be Mings, having actually played as a left back in the past, but also the fact that maybe traditionally you expect your sort of best distributor of the ball to play out from the middle. I think the key there is those angles that Torres passes through those lines. Having the angles to do that is why he played in that position. But obviously that was because Moreno was out. So Moreno's a key player when fit. So like you said, when he is fit, it is very possible that we'll see plenty of Konza and to a lesser extent Chambers filling in on that right-hand side.
Still got Diego Carlos to come in as well, haven't they? Centre-back Villa, very well stocked at centre-back, good quality in the centre-back areas. But I think to start the season at least, it will be Mings and Konza at centre-back, because they did nothing wrong in the back end of the season. They were a really good partnership and lots of clean sheets. Keep so many clean sheets at home as well. I think it was 6 or 7 in a row at home at one point. So those two will start the season. I think that's good because they don't need to put Pau Torres in straight away. They'll have time to integrate. Villa have got a tough first game as well away at Newcastle. So I'd expect it to be Konza and Mings. You've touched on Moreno not being there. I think he was a transformative signing for Villa in January. At the start of the season, not having him or Ramsey down that left-hand side, Emery's going to have to come up with a solution. And one of the solutions in pre-season has been Philogene on the left wing. He started every pre-season game in America. In fact, did he start every pre-season game? Did he start the Warsaw game as well? I can't remember. I think he did. So he started every pre-season game, Philogene. Perhaps expected him to go on loan, but he's probably given himself a chance of being in that first 11 on day one, hasn't he?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, I think obviously it would probably be between maybe him and Bailey if they did want to play a sort of a pacier winger. But I think you definitely put Philogene above Bailey at the moment, based on obviously the minutes that he's had in pre-season, the familiarity that he's built with the rest of the team now, and obviously he's had a couple of decent loan spells in the Championship at clubs that probably weren't the best sort of tactical fit for him to sort of come into an Unai Emery side. But the one thing that he showed, while he's really exciting and he's got a lot of confidence and he'll run at players and he'll commit players, he's very, very hard working off the ball. Like his defensive stats, even in the Championship last season, were very, very good. So yeah, he's definitely played himself into contention. I don't think he'll be a regular starter during the season, but like you said, this start of the season where we don't have Ramsey, obviously Buendia could play off the left, and I think that's a real possibility, and he's done very well in pre-season as well, and I think he could have a really important season. So yeah, there's those sorts of players where they're definitely not certain starters, but you'd still expect them to be pivotal players like Buendia, players maybe less so someone like Philogene, but players like Tielemans, who and the likes of Konsa, who maybe people thought, oh, they're trying to upgrade on him. I thought he was probably Villa's most improved player last season. I thought he was, like, from the season before, obviously he had quite a big dip. Season before that, he was really reliable. So he's had a bit of an up and down time. But last season he came on a lot. I think he was underrated last season alongside Mings, who obviously gets a lot of the sort of spotlight for good and bad reasons from both Villa and opposing fans, who they don't really seem to be keen on Tyrone Mings, but he steals a lot of the focus just because of the way he plays and his sort of physical dominance. But Konsa was very, very reliable alongside him last season. So there's a lot of players, and Villa, like I said, they've got a good bank of players. I think there's only probably 5-6 who you'd think they're going to start pretty much week in, week out. Obviously Martinez, Moreno when he's fit. Like I said, I think McGinn is one, Watkins probably the RB, and I think the other one's probably Luiz over Kamara. I think Kamara will obviously Yeah, I think he's the key. I think he's the star man, personally, Douglas Luiz now. I think obviously last season he was players and supporters player of the season, but I think he's developed into a properly elite level footballer now. Like his understanding of the game off the ball, but the way he's progressing play in this Emery system is outstanding. And he works so well with Kamara. But I thought it was interesting in pre-season that, and obviously he's managing minutes, so you can't read too much into it, but he didn't take off Luiz for Tielemans. He took off Kamara for Tielemans. You'd say Tielemans is a pretty good fit for Luiz as a replacement or a stand-in because he can progress the ball, and you'd say those are the two comparable players. But I think Douglas Luiz has become undroppable at the moment. And unless he has a proper downturn in form, I think he'll be a certain starter in the league week in, week out.
Yeah, he was exceptional last season, Douglas Luiz. I mean, people talk about Bruno Guimaraes, who's been excellent for Newcastle. I don't think there's much difference between those two players. And I don't think there's much difference between Newcastle and Villa in terms of quality, in terms of manager. Newcastle obviously got top 4 last season, but Villa had Steven Gerrard for 13 games, so we essentially gave them a 13-game head start. I look at that Newcastle team, who I would expect to be challenging towards the top 4 again. I don't think Villa are far away from that in terms of quality, but I'm wary of saying Villa are going to be challenging for the Champions League. But 5th place could get Champions League football this season. Yeah. I don't see any reason why Villa can't finish 5th.
Yeah, I think Villa will be right in the mix with the likes of Newcastle. My concern is the fact that Liverpool, I think, will get much better.
Do you think they will be much better, Liverpool?
I think Liverpool will be much better. I think the way they ended last season was more what you'd expect. And I think the changes that have come this summer, it's obviously not a Liverpool preview, but the changes that have come this summer were probably needed. The likes of Henderson and Fabinho going, and that sort of refresh of that midfield. Like, obviously, there's a big assumption that the new signings can fit in well, but I think McAllister's a no-brainer for Bosley. Should settle in quickly, and obviously they'll probably look to sign Lavia or someone else. But yeah, I think they'll be probably closest challenges to City. But behind City, Liverpool, and probably Arsenal, I think Villa can compete with the rest. I'm not saying that they'll finish above the rest, but they can compete. They should consider themselves to be in that sort of bracket. The issue is there's a big bracket. Chelsea come into it, Tottenham possibly, Brighton maybe as well. So there's probably 4 or 5 teams that will be aiming for that sort of 4th Champions League spot, as it were. So any of those teams could finish from 4th to 8th, really, and Villa fall into that category, I think, along with Newcastle.
I guess how they manage Europe as well will play into it. But as managers go, you're in the Europa Conference League. Yes. If you could pick a manager in world football to manage a Europa League or a Europa Conference campaign, most people would probably pick Unai Emery.
Yeah, they would. You'd have to. It's not really another choice. Villa are pretty well set in that regard. Obviously, the other team, and they can rotate. It's like, with all due respect, it's the Conference League and not even the Europa League or the Champions League, whereas Newcastle will be playing Champions League football. Obviously, you get that extra day, far more demanding on the squad, I would say, whereas Villa can and will rotate the squad in those matches. I'm absolutely sure of it. There's a lot to weigh up, and obviously the fact that Chelsea don't have European football means they will come into the mix. You can throw a blanket over quite a few teams, but the fact that we're saying that about Villa in the same conversation as those clubs is astonishing, really, when you look at where we were this time last year.
Yeah, and what would you say to people who are from the outside of the Villa bubble, who maybe don't understand how good Unai Emery is? What would you say about Unai Emery?
He's transformed these players. Like they are so much better tactically and technically, and he's given them the confidence to say, like, you can play this way. If you can't, you'll be out. But you can play this way. But
he hasn't had to get rid of loads of people because they've all done it.
That's his coaching. Obviously, like I said, a lot of it's on the players as well in the way that they've adapted. But that's his coaching. That's his job. They've taken to it so well, and they were just players that I think most Villa fans wouldn't have expected could play this way, and they are. They're playing it regularly and comfortably, and they look like a technically quality side now, whereas 1-2 years ago they looked a mess. So that turnaround, and that turnaround that obviously Emery has inspired, is remarkable. I think it's one of the biggest in recent years in the Premier League. That sort of sharper turnaround. Obviously the points tally that Villa picked up under Emery last season, I think they would have finished in the top 4 had it started when Emery started, and obviously it didn't. So you can say that that's pointless, but we'll see. Like, if we can pick up again and continue in that vein of form, then I think you can be pretty, not certain, but pretty comfortable that Villa will be pushing for Europe next season. It might not be Champions League, and I don't expect it to be. We're ahead of schedule in that sense that Europa League is definitely the target, probably minimum.
I find Villa fascinating to watch now, and I don't think I've ever found us fascinating to watch in my life, and that probably is the biggest thing that stands out overall tactically. I feel like I've learned more about football from watching Unai Emery's team every week.
Yeah, and Villa were, like, for Villa fans, but also for neutrals, a bit of a bore to watch for quite a while. They weren't an exciting it wasn't Villa are on. Let's get Sky and BT on now. Now you should be excited to watch Aston Villa for sure. They will, they won't be perfect, and they will concede goals, and they will make mistakes, and they play risky football at times, but they will be fun. Like, they will be fun. And as a fan, that's what you want, isn't it? You want to win, but you want to enjoy it. And it hasn't been that enjoyable being a Villa supporter for a while. So you can forgive us if we're feeling a little bit not smug, but excited.
Happy. You're just happy, Martin. We're not familiar with this feeling. It's just happiness. But you're right. Football should be fun. And it is watching Aston Villa play, which is an absolute joy for me and you. Martin, thanks ever so much for joining me on the show today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again. And of course, it just had to be about Aston Villa. We forced the preview through. We've managed to do it. So, hopefully the Villa fans that do watch will enjoy it. If you support another team, or even if you don't, go back and watch all the other previews that we've done with the 7 of the Premier League teams. I can't remember if it's 6 or 7 that we've done. Actually, go back and check those previews out. And we'll also be back when the season starts with our Game Week 1 preview. So we'll be doing that every week, obviously, as we have done the last few years. Thanks ever so much for watching.